My name is Stephanie Vance, and I'm 33 years old. 6 years ago, my brother printed out a falsified transcript, attached a forged signature from a department head, and handed it to our parents at Sunday dinner. He told them I'd been expelled from medical school for stealing narcotics. It was a lie, a clean, calculated lie that cost me my family, my reputation, and every dime of support I had. My father called me a disgrace. My mother looked at me like I was a stranger who'd snuck into her home. They didn't ask for my side. They blocked my number, sold my college room furniture, and erased me from every family photo on the living room wall. For 6 years, I was dead to them. Then last night, a level 1 trauma code paged the chief of surgery to Trauma Bay 2. The doors swung open, and lying on the gurney, hemorrhaging, unconscious, and 32 weeks pregnant was my brother's wife. And standing in the waiting room, red-eyed and frantic, was the family that threw me out. Before we dive into this story, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly touches your heart. And drop your city and your local time in the comments below. I love reading where every single one of you is listening from right now. Now, let me take you back to the winter of 2020, to a brownstone in Boston, and the night my brother decided my future belonged to him. Growing up in the Vance household, there was a very clear hierarchy. My brother, Ethan, was 2 years older, charismatic, loud, and the absolute center of my parents' universe. My father, Richard Vance, was a senior partner at a commercial law firm, a man who viewed life as a series of verdicts. My mother, Eleanor, was a woman obsessed with social standing and keeping up appearances in our suburban neighborhood. Ethan was the golden boy who promised to carry the family name into high society, while I was the quiet daughter who stayed up until 2 a.m. in the attic bedroom studying organic chemistry. I didn't care about the parties or the country club dinners. I wanted to be a surgeon. I worked double shifts as a waitress, maintained a top GPA, and gained admission to one of the most prestigious medical programs in Massachusetts. For a brief moment, my father looked at me with something resembling respect, but Ethan saw it differently. To Ethan, my success was a threat to his position as the primary heir to my parents' estate and attention. He was struggling through a failed business venture, bleeding money, and losing favor with my father. He needed a distraction, something so massive it would redirect all of my parents' attention and wrath away from his failures and permanently destroy my standing in the family. He found his opportunity during my 3rd year of medical school. I had been paired on a clinical rotation with an attending physician who was known to be meticulous and strict. Ethan visited my apartment one weekend under the guise of dropping off a birthday gift. While I was in the kitchen making tea, he accessed my laptop, downloaded official university templates, and forged a series of disciplinary letters alleging that I had been caught stealing controlled substances from the hospital pharmacy and selling them to classmates. He didn't just write letters. He created fake email threads, fabricated a formal expulsion notice, and printed them out on official letterhead. The execution was brutal. He didn't confront me. He took the documents directly to my parents on a Sunday evening when I was stuck working a 24-hour shift at the clinic. By the time I returned home to visit them 2 days later, the verdict had already been rendered. I remember walking into the foyer, holding a box of pastries I'd bought from the bakery near the hospital. My father was standing at the top of the stairs, hands folded behind his back, his face rigid as marble. My mother was sitting on the sofa, dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief, refusing to look at me. Ethan was standing near the fireplace, holding a glass of scotch, his face a mask of false sympathy. "Dad, Mom, what's wrong?" I asked, setting the box down on the entryway table. My father didn't speak. He simply threw a manila folder down the stairs. It landed at my feet, spreading the forged papers across the hardwood floor. I knelt down, picking them up, my eyes scanning the text. The words swam across the page: *expulsion*, narcotics diversion, *, unethical conduct, * immediate termination, *. "Dad, this isn't real," I said, my voice shaking as I looked up. "I don't know where you got this. I was just on shift yesterday. I'm in good standing. I can call the dean right now." "Don't lie to us, Stephanie," my father said, his voice dropping into that terrifying, quiet courtroom tone. Ethan brought us these directly from a contact at the university administration. He tried to protect you. He tried to handle this quietly before it ruined our family name." "Ethan is lying," I shouted, turning to my brother. "Ethan, tell them, what is this?" Ethan took a slow sip of his drink and looked at the floor, shaking his head. "I tried to help her, Dad. I told her she needed rehab months ago, but she wouldn't listen. I'm sorry, Steph. I couldn't let you drag Mom and Dad down with you." The sheer audacity of the lie left me breathless. I reached for my phone to call the dean, to pull up my student portal, to show them my actual grades and transcripts. But my father stepped down the stairs, snatched the phone out of my hand, and threw it against the wall, shattering the screen. "Get out of my house," my father said. "Dad, please, listen to me. Call the school, look at my transcript online," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "Just look at my computer." "We have seen enough," my mother sobbed, finally speaking. "How could you do this to us? After everything we gave you? You're a felon, Stephanie, you're a thief." "I am not a thief. Ethan forged this." My father grabbed me by the arm, his grip bruising, and dragged me toward the front door. "If you ever come back here, if you ever contact your mother or your brother again, I will personally see to it that the medical board files formal criminal charges against you. You are no longer a Vance. You do not exist to this family." He shoved me out onto the porch into the freezing December rain and slammed the door. I heard the heavy deadbolt turn. I stood on the wet stone steps in my scrub top and socks, my phone destroyed, my car keys inside, completely penniless, abandoned, and erased. I spent that first night sitting in a 24-hour laundromat 3 miles away, shivering under a thin jacket a stranger gave me. The next morning, I walked to the university dean's office. I showed him what had happened, showed him the fake documents Ethan had created. The dean was horrified and offered to contact my parents to clarify that I was, in fact, one of the top students in my class. But when I called my father's office from the dean's phone, my father answered, listened to the dean speak for 10 seconds and said, "My daughter is a master manipulator who has clearly bought off your staff. Do not call this number again." He hung up. That was the moment I realized the truth. It was never about the evidence. My parents wanted to believe the lie because it fit the narrative they had constructed. Ethan was the heir. I was the disposable extra. A truth that exonerated me meant admitting their golden son was a monster. They preferred the comfortable lie. So I made a choice. I told the dean not to call again. I refused to spend the rest of my life begging for breadcrumbs of affection from people who were so eager to throw me to the wolves. I took out maximum emergency student loans, rented a tiny basement studio that smelled of damp mold, and worked 80 hours a week between my studies and a job cleaning medical equipment at night. Medical school doesn't care about your broken heart. Board exams don't pause because your father disowned you. Pharmacology doesn't get easier because you cry yourself to sleep on a mattress on the floor. So I stopped crying. I buried the girl who wanted her father's approval and built someone new. Someone unyielding, someone precise, someone who let her work speak so loudly that no lie could ever drown it out. During my 4th year, I met Dr. Margaret Vance, no relation to my family, though the irony was never lost on me. Maggie was 60 years old, a legendary trauma surgeon built like a monument of pure grit. She saw me sitting in the hospital cafeteria at 3 a.m. studying surgical atlases while eating cold rice. She sat down across from me, looked at my notes, and said, "You have good hands and a cold head, kid. Stop feeling sorry for yourself and come to operating room 4. Maggie became the mentor I needed and the parent I never had. She taught me how to operate under fire, how to manage catastrophic arterial bleeds, how to keep my heart rate at 60 beats per minute while a patient was dying on the table. When I graduated at the top of my class, Maggie was the only one sitting in the audience. When I matched into a premier trauma surgery residency on the East Coast, Maggie gave me her own silver stethoscope. 5 years passed. I worked like a machine. I completed my residency, took a fellowship in critical care trauma, and rapidly climbed the ranks at St. Jude's Level 1 Trauma Center, the largest trauma facility in the region. At age 33, through sheer relentless discipline and clinical perfection, I was named Chief of Trauma Surgery, the youngest in the hospital's history. I built a life. a real life. I bought a home with a sunlit garden. I surrounded myself with colleagues who respected me and friends who knew my real worth. But the ache of betrayal never completely disappears. It simply sits in the dark corners of your mind, a quiet scar that only throbs when the weather changes. I never checked up on my family. I blocked their names on social media. I never asked mutual acquaintances about them. But Boston is a small city in many ways, and occasionally news would drift through the grapevine. I learned through an old classmate that Ethan had married a woman named Alyssa, the daughter of a prominent real estate investor, and that my father had funded their lavish wedding. I learned that Ethan was trying to launch another tech startup using his wife's family money. I felt nothing. They belonged to a past life, a ghost story I no longer read. Until last night. It was a Thursday, 2:15 a.m. A heavy rainstorm was beating against the glass of the trauma department. I was in my call room, resting my eyes after a grueling 6-hour repair of an aortic rupture. My pager exploded on the nightstand. Level 1 trauma, MVC, 32-week pregnant female, unstable, ETA 3 MINUTES. I was out of the bed before the tone finished sounding. I pulled on my surgical scrubs, grabbed my badge, and sprinted down the stairs to Trauma Bay 2. The emergency department was already buzzing with high-voltage energy. Nurses were prepping rapid infusers, anesthesia was setting up the airway cart, and obstetrics was on standby for an emergency C-section if the fetal heart rate dropped. I stepped to the sink in the trauma bay, snapping on my gloves, my mind instantly shifting into clinical execution mode. "What do we have?" I called out to the charge nurse, Carla. 32-year-old female, unrestrained passenger in a T-bone collision on Highway 9, Carla shouted over the noise of the monitors. "Severe blunt abdominal trauma, massive internal hemorrhage, blood pressure 70/40, heart rate 140. Fetal distress noted by EMS. Her husband and in-laws were following in a separate vehicle. They're pulling into the waiting room right now." The double doors of the ambulance bay burst open. The paramedics came in fast, their boots squeaking on the wet floor, pushing a gurney covered in blood-soaked sheets. The patient was pale as chalk, an oxygen mask strapped to her face, her abdomen distended, blood pooling beneath her back. I stepped up to the head of the bed, swiping the intake iPad from the nurse's hands to glance at the electronic record, while I began my physical exam. Name, Alyssa Vance. Age, *32. Emergency contact, Ethan Vance, husband. Secondary contact, Richard Vance, father-in-law. My hands froze for a fraction of a second. The room seemed to contract, the sharp beep of the vitals monitor echoing in my ears like a distant bell. Alyssa Vance, Ethan's wife, carrying my brother's child, carrying my unborn niece or nephew. For 2 seconds, just 2 seconds, I was no longer the chief of trauma surgery. I was a 27-year-old girl standing on a frozen porch in the rain, holding a shattered phone, listening to my father disown me while my brother smiled behind his glass of scotch. I remembered the feeling of total powerlessness, the absolute injustice of being erased. And here was the woman who carried their legacy, bleeding out on my table. "Dr. Vance," Carla asked, looking at me with concern, "are you okay?" I took one deep, cold breath. The fog cleared. The pain retreated into its box. The hurt girl disappeared and the chief of surgery stepped forward. "I'm fine," I said, my voice completely level. "She has a grade 4 liver laceration and a retroperitoneal hematoma. She's hemorrhaging into her abdomen. We need to crack her belly now, or we lose both her and the baby. Page OB for an immediate perimortem C-section in OR3. Let's move." "Dr. Vance," Dr. Patel, the senior surgical resident, whispered as we wheeled the gurney toward the surgical suite. "I saw the chart, the patient's last name. Is she related to you?" "She's my sister-in-law," I said, without looking away from the patient. "And right now, she is a body on my table that needs to stay alive. Document my disclosure of relation in the chart. Dr. Patel, you will monitor my actions. If you believe my clinical judgment is compromised for a single second, you take over. Understood." "Understood, Chief," Patel said, his eyes filled with immense respect. We pushed into OR3 under the bright, sterile surgical lights. The next 3 hours and 40 minutes were a war waged in silence, blood, and steel. Alyssa's abdomen was filled with nearly 2 liters of free blood when I made the midline incision. The spleen was shattered, the liver torn along the right lobe. The fetal heart rate was dropping into the 70s. "Ob, step in," I ordered. The obstetrics team worked with frantic speed, making the uterine incision. Within 90 seconds, they pulled a tiny, blue, non-responsive baby girl from the womb. The room held its breath. The neonatal team immediately swarmed the warming bed, suctioning the airway, starting chest compressions. "Come on, little one," I thought silently, my hands buried deep inside Alyssa's abdomen, clamping the hepatic artery to control the bleeding. "Come on." A thin, fragile cry broke through the silence of the OR. Then another, stronger. "Baby is breathing. APGAR7 at 5 minutes. Transporting to NICU," the neonatologist called out. "Focus back on mom," I barked. "Suction, more lap pads, cross-clamp the aorta if we can't get control of this vessel." My fingers worked with absolute, flawless precision. I repaired the liver laceration using deep mattress sutures, layer by painstaking layer. I resected the damaged portion of the spleen, tied off the bleeding mesentery, and monitored her pressure as the anesthesiologist pumped 6 units of packed red blood cells and 4 units of plasma into her veins. By 6:15 a.m., the bleeding was stopped. The abdominal closure was clean. Alyssa's vitals were stable, her blood pressure climbing back to a safe 110/70. I placed the final skin staple, stepped back from the table, and pulled off my bloody gloves. My shoulders were aching, my scrubs drenched in sweat and blood. Dr. Patel looked at me, pulling down his mask. "That was unbelievable, Chief. Most surgeons would have lost the baby, if not both of them." "They're both going to live," I said quietly, washing my hands at the scrub sink. I stared at my reflection in the stainless steel mirror above the sink. My face was tired, my eyes dark, but there was no fear left. The past had knocked on my door at 2:00 a.m., and I had answered it with a scalpel and saved its life. "Chief," Carla said, stepping into the scrub room. "The patient's family is in the private consultation room. They've been causing a scene out there for 3 hours. The husband is demanding to see the head doctor, and the father is threatening to sue the hospital if anything happens to his grandchild." I dried my hands with a sterile towel, straightened my scrub top, and pinned my hospital badge firmly to my chest. Printed in bold, black block letters were the words: Dr. SDP Chanai VNCE, MD, FACS. Chief of Trauma Surgery. "I'll talk to them," I said. The walk down the surgical corridor to the consultation room was 30 yards long. Every step felt deliberate, grounded, immovable. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the waiting room. The room was lit by the cold gray light of the dawn breaking through the windows. Sitting in the center of the room, disheveled, frantic, and pale, were 3 people I hadn't seen in 6 years. My father, Richard, was packing near the window, his expensive coat thrown over a chair, his hair unkempt, his face drawn with panic. My mother, Alina, was huddled in an armchair, clutching a designer handbag to her chest, sobbing silently. And my brother, Ethan, was standing near the door, his shirt collar unbuttoned, his face red, yelling at a poor junior administrative staff member. "I don't care about your protocols," Ethan was shouting, slamming his hand on the counter. "My wife is in there. My child is in there. I demand to know who is operating on her if some incompetent resident touches my family." "Mr. Vance," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a steel blade. Ethan stopped mid-sentence. He turned around, his eyes blazing with fury, ready to launch into another tirade. "Who the hell are?" He froze. The words died in his throat. His jaw dropped, his eyes dilating in sheer, unadulterated shock. My father stopped packing. He turned slowly, his eyes dropping to my face, then down to the surgical scrubs covered in blood, and finally fixing on the gold badge pin to my chest. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her tears stopping instantly as if frozen by the sight of a ghost. Silence descended on the room, a heavy, suffocating silence that held 6 years of lies, betrayal, and total absence. "Stephanie," my mother whispered, her voice barely a squeak. I didn't smile. I didn't scowl. I stood perfectly straight, hands resting casually in the pockets of my lab coat, looking at them with the calm, detached authority of a stranger holding all the cards. "Good morning," I said, my tone professional and completely devoid of emotion. "I am Dr. Stephanie Vance, Chief of Trauma Surgery at St. Jude. I am the attending physician in charge of your wife's care, Ethan." Ethan took a step back, bumping into the administrative desk. You're a doctor." "I am the chief of trauma," I corrected smoothly. "Your wife, Alyssa, arrived approximately 4 hours ago with catastrophic internal hemorrhaging and severe fetal distress from a motor vehicle collision." My father took a trembling step toward me, his face a complex mosaic of utter confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror. "Stephanie," we thought. "Ethan told us you were expelled. He showed us the paperwork. You were selling drugs." I looked my father straight in the eyes. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get angry. I simply delivered the truth like a lab result. "Ethan lied to you, Dad," I said calmly. "He forged those documents because he was failing and needed a scapegoat. I graduated top of my class. I completed my residency at Johns Hopkins, and I have run this trauma department for 2 years. I was never expelled. I was never a thief. You chose to believe a lie because it was easier than looking at your son." My father turned his head slowly toward Ethan. The look on my father's face was something I will never forget, the structural collapse of a man's entire reality in real time. "Ethan," my father said, his voice cracking down the middle. "Ethan, what is she talking about?" Ethan's face went from pale to a deep, guilty crimson. He looked at the floor, then at his hands, trying desperately to find a lie, a reframing, a performance. But there were no scriptwriters here. There was no audience of gullible relatives. There was only a blood-stained surgical suite 40 feet away, a chief of surgery standing in front of him, and the undeniable proof of my success printed on my chest. I. Ethan stammered, his confidence completely disintegrated. "Dad, listen, it was a long time ago." My mother let out a strangled, ruined sob. Oh my God, Jerry, what did we do?" "Shut up, Ethan," my father whispered. It was the first time I had ever heard my father tell his golden son to shut up. I didn't linger on their breakdown. I had work to do. "Alyssa sustained a grade 4 liver laceration and a shattered spleen," I continued, bringing the focus back to the medical reality. "I repaired the liver injury and removed the spleen. We controlled the hemorrhage. She is currently stable, intubated, and being moved to the surgical ICU. She is expected to make a full recovery." Ethan gasped, covering his face with his hands. And the baby." I looked at Ethan, letting the silence hang for 3 long seconds. "Your daughter was delivered via emergency C-section," I said. "She was born at 32 weeks, non-responsive at delivery, but my team resurrected her. She is currently stable in the neonatal ICU. She is breathing. She is going to live." My mother sank to her knees right there on the commercial carpet of the waiting room, weeping hysterically, clutching her chest. My father covered his eyes with his trembling hands, his shoulders heaving with silent, devastating sobs. Ethan took a step toward me, his hands reaching out, his eyes wide with a pathetic, desperate gratitude. Stephanie, thank you. My God, you saved my family." I stepped back, half a step, polite, unmistakable. Ethan's hands froze in the air, falling limply back to his sides, just as my mother's hands had 6 years ago when she refused to touch me. "I didn't save your family for you, Ethan," I said, my voice cold and clear as mountain ice. "I saved them because I took an oath, because I am a doctor, and because, unlike you, I do not destroy lives when things get difficult." "Stephanie, please," my father choked out, taking a step toward me, his hands shaking. "Please, let us talk to you. Let us explain. We didn't know. We were tricked. We want to make this right." "You don't get to make this right, Dad," I said, meeting his eyes without a single flinch. You blocked my calls for 5 days. You returned my letters unopened. You threw me out in the cold without asking a single question because my brother's lie suited your pride. You erased me for 6 years. You don't get to write yourself back into my story just because I am the one holding the scalpel. Stephanie, baby. My mother sobbed from the floor, reaching for the hem of my lab coat. I stepped back again out of her reach. You may visit Alyssa in the ICU in 1 hour, I said, pulling out my pen to sign the post-operative chart. As her attending physician, I will oversee her care until she is discharged. But as far as your relationship with me is concerned, my boundary remains. You do not have a daughter. You haven't had one since December of 2020. I turned on my heel and walked down the quiet corridor toward the ICU. I didn't look back. Behind me, I heard the sound of my mother's sobbing echoing off the walls, and my father's cracked, broken voice saying to his golden son, "What have you done to us?" Now, I want to pause here for a moment. If you were in my shoes, sitting in that chief's office after saving the lives of the people who abandoned you, would you ever consider opening that door to your parents again? Option A, keep the boundary locked forever. Some betrayals can never be undone. Option B, allow them a chance at a distant, strictly controlled relationship. Option C, force Ethan to make a public, written confession to every relative before speaking a word. Drop your answer in the comments right now. I read every single response. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, hit that button now, because the final chapter of how this story concluded is something you need to hear. 2 weeks later, Alyssa was discharged from the hospital. Her incision had healed beautifully, and her daughter, whom she named Maya, was thriving in the NICU, gaining weight every single day. Alyssa had learned the whole truth during her recovery. Aunt Ruth, my father's younger sister, the only person in the family who had secretly maintained contact with me, had visited Alyssa's room while Ethan was out. Ruth handed Alyssa a folder containing the original, verified university records from 2020, along with the proof of Ethan's forgery. Alyssa was a woman of fierce integrity. When she realized that her husband had ruined his sister's life with a forged scandal, and that the sister he slandered was the very surgeon who had saved her and her child, she made her own decision. 3 days after leaving the hospital, Alyssa filed for divorce and sole custody of baby Maya. She cited irreconcilable differences and fraudulent character. She moved out of Ethan's apartment and rented a place 3 miles from my house. One afternoon, a knock came at my front door. I opened it to find Alyssa standing on the porch, holding baby Maya wrapped in a yellow blanket. Alyssa looked exhausted, but her eyes were clear. "Dr. Vance," "Stephanie," Alyssa said softly, "I know I have no right to be here, but I wanted you to meet your niece, and I wanted to tell you. Ethan is out of our lives. I will never let my daughter grow up in a house built on lies." I looked down at the tiny baby sleeping in her arms. For the first time in 6 years, the cold stone in my chest melted away. I stepped aside and opened the door wide. "Come in, Alyssa," I said softly. "Coffee's almost ready." My parents tried to reach out. They sent letters to my office. My father showed up in the hospital lobby once, holding a box of bakery pastries, the exact same gesture I had brought to their house 6 years prior. I didn't go down to meet him. I had security politely escort him to his car. They are currently attending family counseling in West Hartford, trying to process the wreckage of their enabling. Ethan is living alone in a rented room, facing potential civil lawsuits from Alyssa's family for financial misrepresentation. The golden sun's crown didn't just fall, it shattered into dust. I didn't get revenge on my family. I didn't plan a scheme. I didn't spend 6 years plotting their downfall. I simply became someone so excellent, so grounded, and so undeniably successful that their lie collapsed under the weight of my reality. I didn't need to destroy them. I just lived my life so fully on my own terms that their absence became their own worst punishment. If you are listening to this right now, and you are fighting through a lie that someone told about you, if you are sitting in the cold waiting for people who will never see your worth to turn around, hear me clearly. Stop waiting for them to validate you. Validate yourself. Build your career, build your peace, build your life with the people who show up when it's dark. And when the people who hurt you finally turn around and see who you've become, let them find a door that you control. You decide when it opens. You decide how wide. You decide who walks through. That isn't revenge. That is architecture. My name is Dr. Stephanie Vance. I am 33 years old, chief of trauma surgery, an aunt to a beautiful baby girl named Maya, and I am finally completely free. If this story spoke to you today, if it reminded you of your own strength, boundaries, or worth, leave a comment below. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that excellence is the best response to injustice. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next story.